Alright, hello everybody. Welcome to another week of virtual learning. Today we're going to review multiplying fractions. And I know the last two lessons, Miss S and I, we had each of our lessons on different strategies on how to find the product, how to find the answer to two fractions being multiplied together. So today we're going to continue to review that in case some of you guys forgot some of the steps on how to do this over the weekend. And I'm also going to introduce another strategy that is that Mr. Young finds much easier to do and saves a lot of time whenever we're multiplying fractions. So before we do that, we're going to go ahead and review what we learned last week. So here we have 1/3 times 2/4. So go ahead and on your blank sheet of paper, write down 1/3 times 2/4. I'm going to begin to go over the steps on how to do this based off of the math strategies that we learned last week. So whenever we're multiplying fractions, as you know, the simpler way, I think the very first step that's pretty easy is to multiply across. So you're going to multiply the numerators, which is the 1 over here, and the 2. Switch colors here. And that's going to be 1 times 2 is 2. And then you're going to multiply the denominators, which is 3 and 4. So we're going to multiply 3 times 4, which is 12. And like I mentioned last week, this first step is very easy, but it gets difficult when you get higher up in grades because your teachers don't just want you to multiply across, but they also want you to simplify these fractions so that they are at its simplest form. And as you can see, 2/12, we can't leave this answer like this. So we're going to go through the process of figuring out how we can simplify this. And to do that, last week we practiced how to find the greatest common factor, right? The biggest number that can go into both the 2 and the 12. And the strategy that we used to do that was we just made a list of all the different factors for each of those numbers, right? So what numbers multiplied together will get you 2 and 12. So here we have 1 times 2, and if we think about is there any other combinations and factors we can use to multiply to get to 2, we see that we only have two numbers, 1 and 2, because 1 times 2 is 2. And let's take a look at the 12. We can always start off, we know a factor is always 1 because 1 times whatever number it is just going to be the same answer. So 1 and 12 is a factor. We also know that 2 times 6 is another factor. And 4 times 3. So I'm going to write 3 and 4. Next step is we're going to look at both of our factor list here and go ahead and circle the numbers that are in both list here. So we see both of these lists have the factor of 1, and both of these lists have a factor of 2. Now the reason why it's called GCF, which is greatest common factor, is we're choosing the greatest factor that's in both of these, that's the same in both of the list here. Right? Not the greatest one in the whole list, but the greatest one that's in both of the lists. So we see that the 2 is the greatest common factor. So we're going to go ahead and divide, because we know that when we divide a number, it's going to get smaller, right? Dividing makes a number smaller, multiplying makes a number bigger. So we're going to go ahead and divide the numerator by 2, and another rule is whatever you do to the numerator or denominator, you have to do it to the, for example, if you do something to the denominator, you got to also do it to the numerator, right? It works the same way for the other way around. If you do something to the numerator, you got to do it to the denominator. So if we're dividing 2 in the numerator, we're also going to divide 2 in the denominator. And we're going to get a final answer here. Go ahead and divide them. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 12 divided by 2 is 6. So our final answer in its simplest form is 1/6. Again, 1/6 and 2/12, they are the same in value. They are just because they're different numbers doesn't mean that one is smaller than the other. We're just simply simplifying them, and though the numbers are different, the value stays the same. Alright, so we're going to move along to our lesson here. Again, we're going to be multiplying fractions, only this time I'm going to teach you guys a strategy that I find a lot easier and saves you guys a lot of time. And just allows you to move through the multiplication problem much quicker. Okay? So go ahead and on your next clean sheet of paper, go ahead and draw 3 columns. Label the first column I do, the second column we do, and the third column you do. It's something that we've been doing since day 1 of virtual learning. So if you wanted to just label the next 10 pages the same way to save you some time, you can go ahead and do that. Write down 3/5 times 2/6 in the first column under the I do section. Again, this is the part where Mr. Young is going to do the problem for you. There's no reason for you to pause the video unless I'm going a little too fast and you need to copy things down. But your only job at this moment is really to just copy down everything that I'm writing as I'm solving this problem here. Okay? So if we take a look at 3/5 times 2/6, which should already be on your sheet of paper, we are not going to just multiply across. Though we know that if we multiply across and simplify after, we will still get the same product. We're going to try something a little different. Okay, we're going to simplify before we multiply. All right. So the way we do that is we're going to take a look at the numbers diagonal. Right. Remember, diagonal is when, if you think about a crossword, not a crossword puzzle, a word search, we know that it's when we circle words that go kind of like on a slant, right? It can either go from left to right on a slant like you see here, or it can go from right to left in a slant like you see over here, right? Everybody has done a word search before, and there are times where teachers have asked you to find a word that's not just vertical or horizontal, up and down or left and right, but they may be in diagonal, so the words are in a slant, which is why sometimes you'll circle a word that's kind of on a slant. All right. Knowing that, and I'll leave that there for now, we're going to circle the numbers that are diagonal from each other. So as you know, again, because it's a slant like this one here, the 3 and the 6 are diagonal from each other. Okay? And let's do that one first. Okay? We know that the 5 and the 2 are also diagonal, but we're just going to focus on one. And what I want us to do is, once we circle the numbers that are diagonal from each other, we're going to do exactly what we would normally do for the last step in the problems that we did last week. We're going to go ahead and try to see if we can simplify before we multiply. So we're going to find the greatest common factor for 3 and 6. Now, this is what I call a friendly number because one of these numbers can actually go into each other, and it could save us a lot of time in terms of figuring out how to simplify this. All right. So again, if we do write this one out, 3 and 6, we know that 1 times 3 is 3, and those are only factors, 1 and 6, and 3 and 2. We know that the greatest common factors, the factors 1 and are in both lists. There's also a factor 3 and no other. So 3 is actually the greatest common factor. So we can go ahead and divide this by 3 and divide this by 3. Again, this the same kind of rule applies here. Whatever you do to the numerator, you got to do it to the denominator. Okay. So this number 6 divided by 3 is going to become a 2. 3 divided by 3, we're going to get rid of that, is going to be a 1. So these are your new and simplified numbers. All right. So that, as you can kind of see, because these numbers are smaller, when we multiply it, the number should already be in the simplest form. Let's switch back to the blue marker here and take a look at the other pair of diagonal numbers, the 5 and the 2. We're going to take a look at them and see if we can simplify those or make those numbers smaller so that when we multiply across, we won't have to simplify after it. So as you know, 5 can't go into 2. Nothing times 5 is going to get 2, and nothing times 2 is going to get you 5 because 5 is a prime number. If you really want to, we can make a list here of all the factors for 5 and 2. We can see that sometimes numbers just can't simplify, right? Though there's both a 1 in both of these lists here, dividing each one of these by 1 is not really going to do anything because anything divided by 1 is just going to be the same answer, right? So we can't really simplify the 5 and a 2 on this diagonal pair here. So once we're done simplifying diagonally before, we're going to multiply them now. So now you got to be very careful here because our new numbers now is a 1. This 2 is the same. This 5 is the same. And our new number here is not a 6 anymore, it is a 2 because we divided it, we simplified across here by dividing it by 3. So all we're left with is 1 times 2, which is 2, and 5 times 2, which is a 10. Alright, and so that is our answer for this problem here. Okay, what you'll see in these problems are, if you simplify before, you're dealing with smaller numbers, so it's a lot easier to simplify than to multiply. As we know, when we multiply, the number gets bigger, and to figure out what the greatest common factor is. Okay, so under the we do section here, go ahead and write this one down. Again, the very first step is that we're going to circle the diagonal numbers here. And the cool thing about this is whenever you see a diagonal pair that's the same, we can just divide it by the same number. So for this one here, because both this diagonal pair is the same number, we're going to divide it by the same number, which is 5. So we're going to divide this by 5. So 5 divided by 5 is going to be 1. So that's our new number. 5 divided by 5 here is also going to be 1. Alright? Usually those are the simple ones that you can just kind of just cross out and make them a 1, because if you divide it by itself, it's just going to be 1. And you can only do that if the numbers in the diagonal are the same. The pair is the same. Now let's take a look at the other diagonal pair here. We have an 8 and a 2. Think about what is the biggest number that can go into the 8 and the 2. So if we want to make the list here, just to get ourselves in the habit of trying to memorize factors, and pretty soon you won't have to do this here. We know that 1 times 8 is 8, and 2 times 4 is 8. We also know that the only two factors for 2 is 1 and 2. Now if you look here, we see that of course they both have 1, and they also both have a 2 in their list, and the greatest common factor is going to be this 2 here. Okay, which means that we're going to divide the numerator by 2 and the denominator by 2. And what we'll do is we'll cross it out after we divide it. So 2 divided by 2 is going to be 1, and 8 divided by 2 is going to be 4. So now what we can do is, our new numbers are, I'll choose a different color here, 1 and a 1 here, 4 and a 1 here. Now we can just multiply across, and what you'll see is 1 times 1 is 1, 4 times 1 is 4, and this number is already in its simplest form, and that's because you guys did the simplifying before you multiplied. Okay? Again, dealing with smaller numbers is just easier on the eye and easier for you to process what the factors are. Again, there's nothing wrong with multiplying it first and then simplifying, but I think simplifying smaller numbers are much easier than simplifying bigger numbers. Alright, go ahead in the you do section. This is your chance to kind of apply everything that you've learned so far in the example I did in the first one, and then the one that we did together on the second one here. Go ahead and try to use the strategy of simplifying diagonally, right? So diagonal, again, is basically a slant from left to right or from right to left. Okay? Go ahead and do that. Go ahead and pause this video when you are done, or even if you're stuck, feel free to unpause the video and just kind of allow Mr. Young to catch up to whatever step you're on, and so that you can check it at the same time. So for this problem, again, we're going to circle the diagonal numbers here. And we're going to take a look, what can we divide both the 4 and the 8 by to make them smaller? Okay, and it has to be the same number. Again, we'll just make the list of factors here. We have 1 and 4, because 1 times 4 is 4, and a 2 times 2 is 4. For 8, we have 1 and 8, and we also have 4 times 2. And I made a mistake up here. Wait, there it is. Okay, perfect. 4 times 2. Then we're going to take a look at what is the greatest common factor. Well, they both have a 1, they both have a 2, and they both have a 4. Okay, a lot of pairs here, but the greatest common factor here is this 4 right here, because there's a 4 in both of these lists. So we're going to go ahead and divide them by 4. Sorry about that. 4 divided by 4 is 1, so we'll cross it out. That becomes a 1. 8 divided by 4 is 2. We'll cross that out and make that a 2. Then we'll take a look at the last diagonal pair here, 3 and 12. We'll make a factors list here, 3 and 12. We know that 1 times 3 is, and 1 and 3 are the only factors for 3. 1 and 12, because 1 times 12 is 12. 4 times 3 is 12. And 6 and 2. Let's try to squeeze that here. Okay. Now we're going to take a look at what is the greatest common factor. So let's switch to the red here. They both have a 1 and they both have a 3. There's no reason to circle anymore because we already circled the 2 and only factors for 3. The greatest common factor is 3, which is why we're going to divide the numerator and the denominator by 3. Go ahead and divide them. 3 divided by 3, we'll cross this one out, is 1. So our new number is 1. 12 divided by 3 is 4, so we'll cross this one out and write a 4 here. So our new numbers is 1, 2, 1, and 4. So if we multiply that across, and let's erase this here, is 1 times 2, and because these are our new numbers here, is 2. And 1 times 4 is 4. And we know that 2/4 is the same thing as 1/2. Alright, so again, what you'll see sometimes is even if you simplified before, once you get to the end, even though the number is smaller, we still got to double check if we can simplify it further. So if I remember correctly, there's also one that we did 2 problems ago over here, where even though we simplified before, we got a smaller number, which should be easier for your mind to process whether or not we still need to simplify. We can see that we can actually simplify this slightly more, divide them the top and the bottom by 2, and we'll get 1/5. And that number here is in its simplest form. Now this takes a lot of time to, I guess, understand and master. Again, if you like the strategy of multiplying across and then simplifying after, that's totally up to you, because we're going to get the same answer even if you decide to simplify before and multiply after. Alright, so take the time to practice whatever strategy works best for you, but for this lesson, we're going to only practice simplifying before multiplication. So you guys can go ahead and open up the Google form and start your assignment for today. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to call me on my cell phone or text me. I also will be in a live meeting for you guys to sign on and ask questions, or to just have a conversation about our weekend if you like, or a little extended weekend. So hope everyone's doing well, and have a great day.